I was invited by the codebreaking unit of the FBI to give a joint presentation at this year's American Academy of Forensic Sciences conference in Seattle back in February. It's a gathering of crime lab experts, such as forensic examiners, toxicologists, anthropologists, document examiners, and other scientists and researchers. You don't normally see codebreakers at these conferences, but the FBI Crime Lab has a codebreaking unit that's an important part of their forensic skill sets. So a presentation about the Zodiac cipher solution and the history and role of the FBI's codebreaking unit was a good fit for the conference agenda. There were many interesting presentations and poster sessions at the conference, despite most of it being well beyond my expertise. Topics like ballistics, DNA analysis, toxicology, fingerprints, identification of remains, analysis of trace evidence, handwriting analysis, restoring shredded documents, and much more. It's fascinating, often gruesome, but very important work. It's amazing what forensic scientists can accomplish. Our session was a breakfast seminar called Procedures for Breaking the Zodiac Killer's Code. FBI cryptanalyst forensic examiner Jeanne Anderson spoke about the procedures the FBI uses in cases like the Zodiac Killer that involve codes and ciphers. She previously published very interesting papers about famous ciphers in true crime. One is about the cipher written by Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. Another is about the elaborately enciphered journals found when Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was apprehended. After her portion of the talk, I told the story about Zodiac's 340 cipher, its history, and how it was broken. There was a good turnout at our seminar, about 140 people, and we met some really fascinating people. During the Q&A after the seminar, I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick. She has a PhD in nuclear physics and has made enormous achievements in the field of forensic genealogy. She helped identify remains found after the 1948 crash of Northwest Flight 4422 in Alaska. She also identified a 2-year-old child who died in the Titanic disaster, and helped identify suspects in several cold cases. A team including Dr. Fitzpatrick helped an amnesiac discover his identity and family members. She co-founded the DNA Doe Project, an incredible non-profit effort that identified numerous unidentified people from their remains. Her work also led to exposing fraudulent books, hoaxes, and stolen identities. A noteworthy example has connections to the Zodiac case. A mysterious, reclusive man named Joseph Newton Chandler III committed suicide in 2002. Soon after, authorities discovered his name was actually stolen from an 8-year-old boy who died in a traffic accident in 1945. 14 years after the mystery man's death, Dr. Fitzpatrick and Identifinders International used forensic genealogy to identify him as Robert Ivan Nichols. Some amateur investigators believe he might have been the Zodiac Killer, using the stolen identity to avoid capture. Dr. Fitzpatrick's career is incredible, and it was an honor for her to attend our presentation. Another interesting person we met was Dr. Mark Benecke, an enthusiastic forensic biologist who runs a popular YouTube channel. We chatted for a bit, and it can be seen on his channel. 2 other codebreakers from the FBI also gave talks at the conference. David Simpson is an expert on language games called Ludlings and how they are used by criminals. Pig Latin is probably the most recognizable example of a Ludling, where you take the first sound of the word and put it at the end, followed by an A sound.
That's Pig Latin.
Sure, anybody can understand it. It's very simple.
My name is Mo. In Pig Latin, that's Ome.
My name is Larry. Now, what's that in Pig Latin?
Ome.
Oh. It's Arile.
Boy, are you umday. Now follow me. Larry, Arile. Mo, Ome. Curly, Curly-Q. Hold him!
Uppbeat is another example of a Ludling.
Hi, Robin. Zabby sabby zabba, mobby jabby, pobbin sabble. Ubbit wobble dabble, obble yabber, hobble mubber. Ubbin hobble yabu, ubbin obble yabber tabbis. Jabbas hobble dabby dabbin yabber, hobbin lubby zabbis. Ubbin subby, ubba bubby, dubba bubby. Yabu wobble gubbit, srubby dobby.
Ludlings have simple rules, but the results can be hard to understand. For example, a man arrested for armed robbery called his girlfriend from jail to tell her to lie when she was questioned. But calls were recorded, so he tried to disguise the conversation with a Ludling known as gibberish. Many people learned how to speak gibberish when they were children. I'll try to read some of the intercepted conversation. Tedigal Herdiger, Vatigan get Wedegen Shidigi Kutagums, Tudago, Mightagai Tridago, Tedagel Hertiger Nadagat Tudagu Sedige, Vadaget Shidigi Sedigant, Midigi, Medigas Sedigages, Vadaget Nidigit. These kinds of conversations, when they're discovered, are sent to FBI cryptanalysts for translation. Kirsten Tate gave a talk about how to detect hidden messages where they might go unseen. Criminals often use techniques of hiding messages in plain sights. For example, a letter might look innocent, but the real message being conveyed is concealed using little tricks. Here's a real example created by a German ambassador during World War I. Apparently, neutrals' protest is thoroughly discounted and ignored. Isman hit hard. Blockade issue affects pretext for embargo on byproducts, ejecting suets and vegetable oils. To find the secret message, take the second letter in each word. Put them together and you get Pershing Sales from New York, June 1st. The German ambassador to the United States during World War I sent that message to his foreign office using this trick, avoiding censorship by the British. Prisoners often use these kinds of methods to hide messages and letters that seem innocent and harmless to elude detection by prison staff. Tate's research uses specialized software tools to process natural language, and she found that a writer's style of writing changes in subtle ways when they are trying to hide messages. Specifically, certain words they tend to use in normal writing will be missing in a suspicious letter. Also, sentences in the suspicious letter tend to be shorter on average. So tools that can detect these differences will make it easier for authorities to discover when criminals are trying to pass along secret information. Now I'll include our seminar about the FBI codebreaking unit and our breaking of the Zodiac's 340 cipher. I don't have Jeannie's part of the talk, so I'll summarize her presentation. Then you'll see my portion of the talk. But I have to apologize in advance for the bad audio quality. I only captured the room audio. And since it was a breakfast seminar, you can hear the clattering of silverware as everyone was eating their breakfast. So to help make it more understandable, you can turn on subtitles. Just click the closed captions button on the video by clicking on this CC icon. Jeanne Anderson introduced our seminar. She's a cryptanalyst forensic examiner working for the Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, or CRRU. It's part of the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia. In 2010, NBC News ran this story, which gave a good overview about the FBI and its codebreakers.
A lot of us know what we know about crime fighting from television shows. A lot of the painstaking work of investigators is decidedly old tech on some of those shows, but tonight, NBC's Pete Williams opens the curtain on a corner of the FBI, the real FBI, where the fight against crime is truly more of a battle of the minds.
What was in a letter sent from jail by Joseph Smith while awaiting trial for the kidnapping and murder of 11-year-old Carly Bruscia? Unable to decode the jumble of numbers and symbols, Florida police turned to the FBI's cryptanalysis unit.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The code breakers. They realized those symbols stood for letters, but the FBI's Daniel Olson says they had one more puzzle to solve.
What we thought was the first line is actually the last line. The message started at the bottom and worked backwards all the way up to the top.
So the message starts here and goes right to left, up.
Correct.
The letter revealed where Smith hid evidence that helped convict him.
The defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree as charged.
Not every cipher is so easy to break. Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, left behind journals protected by elaborate layers of encoding. The FBI cracked them, discovering that after one of his fatal attacks, Kaczynski wrote, quote, "Excellent, humane way to eliminate somebody. He probably never felt a thing." Sometimes, Olson says, they break a code in a moment of inspiration.
You're driving in the car and something flashes in your mind and you're on the phone with someone in the office. Here, quick, try this.
Spies, gangs, the mafia, even serial killers use codes, some quite complex.
It's one of those things that, you have to be tenacious like a dog, I think, when you work these cases.
Example, Brian Regan, an intelligence analyst who stole secret documents on U.S. spy satellites, hoping to sell them, and buried them around the country, noting the locations in a cipher.
The code was so complex that he himself could not recall exactly how he enciphered the messages.
The key turned out to be his junior high school yearbook. Take a pair of numbers from his code, mark off that many pictures from his own photo, then count the number of letters in that student's name to eventually find the map coordinates for the secret stashes. Another success for FBI codebreakers whose fight against crime is a battle of wits. Pete Williams, NBC News, Quantico, Virginia.
Codebreaking is not a normal forensic discipline. There aren't other labs that do it, so the FBI is unique in this regard, but their work is important for investigations and in court. In addition to breaking cryptic codes and ciphers, they also look at records, which might be hiding details about crimes such as drugs and sex trafficking. They also analyze symbols, one-character elements that might have special meanings. Jeanne gave a brief overview of the Zodiac killer, who committed 4 attacks in Northern California in the late 1960s. His crimes resulted in 5 deaths and 2 wounded. He gave himself the name Zodiac. His crimes crossed multiple jurisdictions, causing confusion and problems for investigators. He taunted police and media and wrote 22 letters and 4 ciphers. Zodiac sent his first cipher, called Z408 for its 408 characters, to 3 different local newspapers. A school teacher and his wife saw it in the papers and solved it within a week, but the last 18 symbols remain unsolved. The FBI believes they are nulls or filler to ensure each part was the same size and shape. His next cipher was the infamous Z340. It looks similar to his first cipher, so it was natural to think that he used the same system. But nobody could break it, so something else must have been going on. Later, he sent 2 more ciphers, Z13 and Z32, but they're so short that the FBI believes they're unlikely to be broken, because solutions can't be proven to be unique. The FBI codebreakers follow 4 steps of cryptanalysis, originally developed by William Friedman, known as the godfather of cryptology. Step 1. Figure out what language the message is written in. For Zodiac, it was safe to assume English, since he always wrote in English. Step 2. Figure out the encryption system. The Hardens succeeded with this step for Z408. It was homophonic substitution. But everyone got stuck on this step for his remaining 3 ciphers, until recently for the Z340. The next steps go together. Step 3. Reconstruct the key or codebook, which are the instructions for encoding and decoding the message. Step 4. Reconstruct the plaintext message using the results of Step 3. The Hardens reconstructed Z408's key through trial and error and looking for patterns of letters and words in the plaintext as they worked, until they reconstructed the entire plaintext message. Many people claim to have solved the Z340. The FBI codebreaking unit reviewed proposed solutions, but they found none of them to be valid until December of 2020. A famous example is a solution from Robert Graysmith, known for his popular books about the Zodiac case. The FBI gave an assessment of his solution in a report in 1970. Based upon the information available, it is the opinion of respondent that the solution is not a valid decryption. The total feeling generated toward the decrypted solution is that the solution has been forced. When a cryptogram has been decrypted properly, there is an unmistakable sense of rightness about the solution. This sense of rightness is completely absent in the proposed solution. So they basically roasted Graysmith's claims. Jeanne pointed out that the FBI wouldn't use that kind of wording in today's cryptanalysis reports, since it talks about feelings and opinions rather than hard facts. Check out the very first episode of Let's Crack Zodiac for my deep dive into Graysmith's solution. His solution was rejected by the FBI, but in 2020 they confirmed our solution. They amended their examination report of the Z340 and released a press statement. On December 5, 2020, the FBI received a solution to a cipher popularly known as Z340 from a cryptologic researcher and independently verified the decryption. Over the past 51 years, CRRU has reviewed numerous proposed solutions from the public, none of which had merit. That brings us to my part of the presentation. I'll switch to the audio from that day. Again, sorry for the bad audio quality. Be sure to turn on captions to better understand the presentation. So here we are at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences conference. But I have to confess, I'm not a forensic scientist, and I don't work in a crime lab somewhere. I'm just a guy who got interested in the Zodiac case and kind of adopted it as a hobby of mine, particularly the cipher related to the case. And that's kind of a running theme with this case, because it has been unsolved for over 50 years. It has developed this notoriety and infamy. And there's been a lot of public involvement in the case because of all the news coverage and all the material that has come out over the years. Things like the Zodiac's letters and ciphers and police reports and stuff like that. One of the things that Zodiac did very well was getting his material published in newspapers through the use of extortion. He would write letters saying, publish my stuff or else I'm going to go on killing rampages. And so the newspapers often obliged with that. So here's some examples of the headlines. So his name was everywhere in the papers for decades and continues to be. So this has created a lot of incentive for people to look into the case and get involved, people outside of law enforcement, like me. So the 408 was the first big example of public contribution to the case. Jeanne talked about this. We sent these 3 cipher portions to the newspapers and they published it. And within days, the Hardens beat everybody else to the solution. It took them about 20 hours total. And they did it with pen and paper. They didn't have any fancy computers or technology to work with. And they were not professional cryptographers. Donald Harden there was a school teacher, and he and his wife just sat down and worked it out. And through their tenacity, they were able to come up with the solution to the cipher. So over the years, as I said, a lot of material about the case had come out. This is a sample of all the material that he had mailed to various newspapers and individuals. They include things like letters, ciphers, greeting cards, a lot of taunting messages, mysterious symbols. There's plans for a bomb, like death machine, quote unquote, that he was building, or claimed to be building. And then police reports were also released over the years. People managed to obtain them and publish them. So this made the case very accessible to the ordinary citizen, to the average person. And therefore everyone dreamt of being the one to solve the case once and for all, because it's such a famous case. The internet played a very huge role in the development of this case. Communities started to form online. These are 3 of the biggest ones. And the one at the bottom there, zodiackiller.com, is probably the oldest. It is the oldest. It's about 24 years old now. That went up in 1998, back when not everybody was online. So these communities have kind of gathered online over the years. They share case information, the Zodiac materials, the police reports, articles. They talk to the victims on their own, the victims' families, and get witness statements and things like that. They do their own investigations. It's quite a mix of information. They share a lot of different ideas online, and it's very hard to distinguish the good ideas from the bad ideas because it is just an open forum online, and as we know, the internet is where a lot of good information goes to die. And so about 15 years ago, I saw this on one of the forums, the famous 340 cipher, and that's when I got hooked because my interest in puzzles and computer programming, I felt that I had a good fit skills-wise to working on this thing. And I thought, how hard could it be, right? And me personally, it took me almost 15 years to get to the solution. And I needed a lot of help. It wasn't just me. By the time that I saw it, it had been unsolved for about 40 years. So it had already had a reputation for being this famous unsolved thing. And it was really appealing to me because I really wanted to know what the message was, that intense curiosity. I really wanted to know what it said. Was it some creepy message? Did it have anything useful in it, any useful information that could actually help solve the case? So it was really easy to fall into that trap that many hundreds of other people have fallen into, thinking that they can contribute to the case. And in rare cases, they actually do contribute something useful. So I set about the work of cryptanalysis, looking for clues, doing statistical analysis, trying to find the patterns, going through some of the process that Jeanne described, trying to figure out how it's enciphered, looking for patterns, studying the prior work that had been done. A lot of other people in those 40 years have tried many different things. Are any of those useful and pertinent to my analysis? I looked a lot on the Zodiac sites and forums, but again, it's really hard to separate the good information from bad information. It's very tedious, but there were interesting nuggets from rational people that you can use in your research. So one of the things that I really tried to do was collect all of the information in one place. I was frustrated by how hard it was to find information about the ciphers, especially since it was all mixed in with all these unusual or deranged ideas that people had about the ciphers. So I made a website called zodiackillerciphers.com and created this page called the Encyclopedia of Observations, where I was just listing out all the factual details about the ciphers, any clues that might help with the study of the unsolved ciphers. And in the intelligence business, this is called open source intelligence. You're looking at public sources and trying to collect useful information that are pertinent to a particular topic. So I wanted this to serve as a reference for other code breakers, because there's a whole community of people working on this thing. And I was trying to help prevent duplicate effort, because when you're looking online for information about this cipher, you find all sorts of things, and you want to keep them from going down the wrong path. Hopefully, as a team, you can drive towards an actual solution to this thing. So there's two different approaches you can consider when attacking the 340. You could do it like the Hardens did when they cracked the 408 and get out some paper and pen and pencil and try to figure out what the solution is. But if you're lazy like me, you want to use computer software, code-breaking tools. And so we developed some different code-breaking tools over the years to help us test different ideas. Because it's very tedious to take an idea about how the cipher is made and try to test it and try to come up with a plain text message. So over the years, a lot of these efforts failed, but we would use what we would learn from those failures to improve the tools to make them better at exploring even more ideas and ruling things in and out as far as possibilities about how the cipher was made. The other thing that happened over many decades was gradually there was a growing body of academic research that had been done specific to the ciphers. These are some excerpts from some of the papers I found over the years. Most of them are concentrated on computer-assisted methods. Basically, the main problem that you have is you're trying to find the correct key, but there can be a large number of possible keys to unlock the cipher, but only one of them works. And if you try to get a computer to test every single key, it'll never finish because there's way too many keys. There's an astronomically large number of keys to try out. So you have to come up with really smart ways to look for the key. And so that's what a lot of the papers were doing. It's a bit like trying to find a needle in the haystack. You don't want to look through the entire haystack. You want to have an educated guess about where the needle is. So that's what these papers were doing. And a lot of them were able to solve the first cipher very effectively, but couldn't come up with an answer for the 340. And also over the years, Jeanne mentioned this, there's been a lot of solution proposals, thousands of them. And it's very challenging to go through them all and try to figure out which ones use good ideas, which ones use bad ideas. Usually an experienced cryptanalyst can tell right away by looking, but to actually go through an analysis process and explain why the methods are bad, it's usually very difficult. But what usually happens is people will force something to appear that isn't really there. So they'll do some kind of manipulation of the ciphertext to make words and phrases appear, or information pertaining to their favorite suspect. They might have someone in mind, and so they're trying to make that person's name show up in the ciphertext, or other details like their date of birth, important locations, or life events and things like that. But a lot of times, they're just seeing faces in clouds. It's a noisy process. They're just seeing random coincidences that aren't really there. When you look at this case for too long, you're at risk of becoming this guy. This is Charlie. He's a character from a comedy show called It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And this is a famous scene. He's ranting about this unhinged conspiracy theory that he has. And it's become a meme on the internet when you want to represent like somebody's going on this wild goose chase or going down this crazy rabbit hole. The thing about the Zodiac case is there's a lot of Charlies. There's a lot of people that have gone down these wrong paths that aren't sensible. And I started to worry that I was becoming Charlie because, after all, I had spent so many years working on this thing with nothing really to show for it. I couldn't come up with any plain text for the cipher, so maybe I was going down the wrong rabbit hole. And, I had strange ideas about what might be in the cipher. But some of the ideas actually turned out, luckily for me, to actually be on the right track. And these are examples of some academic papers that mentioned suspicions that lined up with what we were thinking, which was something was happening with the 340 cipher that was different than the first cipher. It wasn't just a substitution, there was some other step involved that no one could figure out. So the first paper there says the Zodiac 340 is a combination of a homophonic substitution cipher and a certain column transposition. The second one says something similar. The cipher may not only use a homophonic cipher, but also another encryption method such as transposition. So like rearranging the text first and then applying the symbols. Something like that might have been going on. We started developing some evidence that this might be happening, and this is one of the things that we noticed initially. Unusual patterns like this, where we have these two backwards L shapes, and they consist of the same three symbols repeating both horizontally and vertically. So this one has RJI, repeating vertically and horizontally in this pattern. Same thing's happening with the blue one. The three symbols backwards B dot and backwards C, repeat horizontally and vertically. So we wondered why that was happening. Could it be because the message was being written in multiple directions instead of just left to right, top to bottom? But the most important piece of evidence that we were exploring had to do with repeating bigrams. Now, what is a bigram? A bigram is just two letters or symbols that appear right next to each other. And to explain, this is the 408 cipher, the first cipher, the one with the known solution, and its plain text is here on the right. Now, the English language has a lot of repeating patterns in it, like common letter pairs that show up together, like LL and TH. And so the thing about substitution is you can hide the identity of the letters with these special cipher symbols, but you can't hide all of those repeating patterns. They peek through. For example, this solid square and B pattern shows up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And those decode to LL. And those are showing up because of the words killing, all, kill, thrilling, and will. So even though the symbols replace those letters, the patterns are still showing up, the repetitions. Here's another example, backwards Q and square. Those show up 3 times. And it's because they stand for the letters MY. So the word my shows up 3 times, 1, 2, 3. And the bigram VW appears 3 times because they stand for the letters B and E, which shows up in the words because, better, and be. And so those were important clues, especially to the Hardens when they were using pen and paper to decrypt the message. When you decode some of the symbols, some other patterns of words start popping out and they start to look like fragments of real words, and you can do trial and error to figure out what the words are. And so we were hoping to find those kinds of patterns in the 340 so we could use a similar method to try to come up with the answer. So here's all of the repeats in the 408 shown together. So all the blue here indicates which symbols are repeating, which pairs of symbols are repeating. And there's 62 repeats total. The whole point of that is that there are a lot of them. So it's an indication that the underlying message is real and it has all these repeating patterns in it. When you compare that to the 340, there aren't as many. They're there, but there aren't as many. In fact, there's a whole region here where they're completely absent. When we run experiments, we find that ciphers like the 340, if we were making substitution ciphers like the 340, we would get a lot more bigrams that repeat than that. So we were wondering, well, where were they? Well, why can't we find them? The other possibility was maybe the patterns aren't there to begin with. Maybe there's no message, and that's why we can't find any of these repeating patterns that are interesting to us. But it turned out those patterns, they were hiding. We had to dig for them, but you had to dig in a certain way. So this is one way that we found them. This is called period 19 transposition. Basically, all we do is we rewrite the original cipher message using a simple rule. You take the first symbol, you write it out. So we've got the H here. Then you count ahead 19 positions. So you skip ahead by 19 to this plus, and then you write it down. So now you have a plus. Do it again, and you get to the M. Then to the triangle. Now, if you notice, this is forming a kind of a diagonal pattern. So it's kind of like a diagonal reading rule through the ciphertext. And when you keep going, you'll eventually get to the bottom. And then so when you get there, you go all the way back to the top, start at the E, and then repeat the process. And so you continue to read diagonally in this way until you cover the entire ciphertext. So now we have a rewritten version of it that is the period 19 transposition of the original ciphertext. So now we can count up the bigrams again. Here's the original 340 again. It only has 25 repeats in it. Our rewritten version that comes out of this simple rule has 37 of them, which is like a 50% increase in the number of repeating bigrams. So there's more of them. So this gave us hope. Maybe we were on the right track. Maybe we were starting to find some of this evidence of the underlying message because it's repeating and it's showing up in the ciphertext somehow. But even with this rearrangement, we couldn't come up with the plain text. We couldn't come up with a solution, so it was very frustrating. This is the original 340 again, and this is how the patterns look in the cipher before you do any kind of rearrangement. So as an example, the backwards P and plus sign, these are 19 spots apart, so each one of them has kind of this diagonal pattern. And the reason those are showing up 4 times is because this turned out to be the plaintext message underneath. The letters C and H are repeating in the plaintext message, the real one, as it turns out. Here's another example. The less than sign and S happens 3 times, and it's because the underlying plaintext has the pattern ID in the plaintext message. Similarly, here's instead of a repeating bigram, this is a trigram. It's just 3 symbols: X, crosshairs, and circle and dot, and it happens twice. And the reason is because the underlying plaintext has a repeating pattern, RAD. It appears twice in the underlying plaintext. So even though we were identifying real fragments of the underlying plaintext using this method, we couldn't get to it yet. There was something missing. So we were trying a lot of different ideas of ways that you can rearrange the message. These are some simple ideas, such as writing the message out in columns, or writing it out along diagonals, or these weird L shapes, or zigzag pattern for like a rail fence transposition, or this weaving like back and forth pattern, or a snake pattern, or a spiral. And we were trying all these different like simple and complicated ideas and combinations and all sorts of things that none of them turned up any solution. It was really important to be able to test a lot of these ideas because there's, as you can imagine, there's so many different ways you can rearrange a message before doing substitution. So this is the AZ Decrypt code-breaking software by our teammate Jarl van Eyck. He's a Belgian programmer. And he had been working on this cipher for many years as well. And we communicated a lot on the online forums. But he produced what I consider to be one of the best pieces of code-breaking software that I've ever used. It's very efficient, it's very fast. It can solve the 408 cipher, the first cipher, automatically, almost instantaneously. Within a few milliseconds, it spits out the right answer. And that was really important for us because we wanted to be able to take all these different rearrangements of the 340, feed them into the software like this to try to come up with some sensible plaintext. But we kept failing. There was still something missing. Eventually, Sam Blake, an Australian mathematician, joined our efforts. He reached out to me back in 2019. His idea was to use math software to comprehensively generate thousands of different rearrangements based on different ideas of how the cipher might be rearranged. So it was a very methodical and systematic way of going through as many possibilities as possible to get as much coverage of different ideas as possible. And so over those months, he gave me around 650,000 different files, which were rearrangements of the 340 cipher. And I would take them and feed them into the code-breaking software in batches and then see which of the results looked like real text, like a real message. And that was a very laborious process, as you can imagine. Most of the results that come out of that process end up looking like gibberish, but they'll have some words sprinkled in here or there. So I became kind of accustomed to seeing occasionally an interesting word, but most of the time they were just false positives. So you get excited because some interesting word will show up, but then you have to dismiss it because none of the rest of the solution seems to work. Until I spotted this. And the reason this was interesting to me, so you can see like much of it doesn't really make sense. It's kind of nonsensical, except for this portion. Hope you are trying to catch me, and or the gas chamber. And that stood out because it's more than just one word. And they sound like something that a deranged serial killer would have written. So I felt like we really needed to concentrate on this one. This particular result came from this rearrangement of the 340 cipher. The important thing here is that it's split into 3 sections. This 9-line section at the top, the next 9 lines, and then this 2-line segment at the bottom. The other important thing about this is that the period 19 diagonal rule that I mentioned is applied individually to each section. And that gives you a different result than if you did it for the entire cipher all at once. The example I showed earlier, you're doing the diagonal reading rule for the entire cipher, whereas in this case, we're doing it to the individual sections. And that was key. So since we had some phrases popping out for this first section, I took it and put it in the code-breaking software, and I asked the software to explore all the different keys to try to find the right answer, but I also told it, don't mess with these phrases because they might be showing up in the right place and they might be part of the real solution. So the hope you are trying to catch me and the gas chamber, I was telling the program not to break those phrases, but look at all the different possibilities for the other parts of the key to see what would turn out. And then when I pressed the button, the solution did pop out for that first section. So we've got, I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the. And it has a few misspellings in it, but it's a sensible message. We didn't have to force it to come out. There's a couple of locked phrases, but the rest of it emerged naturally. And the part that gave me a heart attack, almost, was seeing this phrase. That wasn't me on the TV show. When I saw that, I knew that we had the right answer, because 2 weeks before he had mailed that cipher back in November 1969, there was a live broadcast of the Jim Dunbar show, where he took a call from somebody who called himself the Zodiac killer. Turned out it wasn't, it was an imposter. But he was saying things like, I need help, I'm sick, I don't want to go to the gas chamber. And that's what he's mentioning in that first section. So that's when I knew we were on the right track and we needed to keep going down this path. So we had the key for the first section. We had 100% of the key. So that means we could apply it to the second section. And this is what popped out from the second section. And it's more of that kind of mix of real language and nonsensical stuff. So then we're starting to get frustrated again. What's going on with the second section? There's something wrong with it. Maybe he did use a different key or some other process. A lot of the text made sense, though. You know, everything here in red makes sense. And there's this big stretch here, has nothing when they reach paradise. And, you know, he's mentioned paradise in his other cipher solution and in his other letters. So it had to have been part of the real message. But what's going on with the rest of it that we can't understand? And it turned out it had to do with these lines in yellow here. This little section up here and this longer section here. Those were contributing to the garbles because we had to fix some problems with those. This is what the second section looks like when you apply the key, but before you do the diagonal reading rule. So this is just the raw plain text. To get the plain text, you have to do the period 19 rule and rewrite it. But without doing that, one thing we noticed was that the words life is appear in the clear. You didn't have to do the transposition rule to find that phrase. Turns out you have to ignore it when applying the period 19 transposition rule. And the other thing we noticed was this line contributes to the rest of the garbled message. And if you shift it one position to the right, like this, and then apply the rule, the message comes out right. It fixes the message. And then you take this H and you move it back to this hole here. So that's the fix for that line. Now you go through and do your period 19 rule and you untranspose it and you get the final message, which still has some misspellings in it, but it's sensible. You can read it and understand it. It says, sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I'm not afraid because I know that mine knew. Great, okay, so now we have the second section. What's going on with this third section? It's just these two lines. If we apply the key to those two lines and we don't do any kind of period 19 transposition with it, we get this. And there's some recognizable words in there. Will be, easy, and death. But there's something weird going on with these words. Can anyone tell what's going on with those words? They're backwards. So those are the backwards words. You just reverse them and you get life will be an easy one and paradise death. So easy peasy. So there's a full solution. We've got the whole message. We were pretty excited. We sent our report to the FBI. They confirmed it pretty quickly. Eventually they put out the press release confirming it. That's why we're here. The reason we were confident in our solution was that everything we found in the plain text was consistent with the timeline of the case, particularly that he was referring to things that were happening 2 weeks before he had written the message. And we didn't force that to appear in the message. We found a substitution key and we applied a rule, the period 19 rule, splitting it into 3 different sections. The language of the plain text is consistent with his other writings, particularly his use of the word paradise that appears all over the place in his letters and the first cipher, and he misspells it the same way each time. He uses a C instead of an S. We used the same key for all 3 parts of the cipher, so we didn't have to use multiple keys to try to squeeze more text out of it. We found some errors, but With some minor changes, we were able to get the entire message to come out. And there were no leftovers like in the first cipher. First cipher, the last 18, everyone thinks that it's filler. It was just padding the message. There was none of that in the 340. So all 340 characters contributed to the readable plaintext, the entire message. So what's next? Jeanne mentioned there's 2 more unsolved ciphers, the short ones, the 13 and the 32 character ones. She already described the problems with those. Cryptanalysts like to have a lot of data to work with. The 408 and the 340 had hundreds of letters that you could look at for clues. We could see the repeating patterns and things. And it was much harder to find answers that fit. Whereas these, there's not a lot of data to work with. You can't get as many clues out of it. And you can get so many other things to fit, so many possible solutions to fit. Impossible to verify. So what did we learn from 51 years of staring at this damn thing? Way too much time. Classical ciphers, like substitution ciphers and transposition ciphers, tend to be really easy to solve. They're very insecure. There are well-known methods for cracking them. Zodiac used a combination of things that made this one almost impossible to crack. He added these variations, the sectioning, this kind of homemade way of transposing the ciphertext, the plaintext message. And he introduced some problems in the encipherment process that we had to identify and correct. So all those complications made it extremely difficult. Places like the FBI lab, they don't have time to go through all of this process. It's a laborious, many-year process involving lots of people. It was very important for us to collect information, to kind of fuel experiments for how we would go attack this thing. So we had to get really good at prioritizing what to look at, which possibilities to explore, because there were so many different ways to encipher messages, so many different ways to hide information. We learned that we need to make better tools, because now that we know what kind of scheme this is, it still relied on a lot of our own homemade methods to analyze and tools that we built specifically for this problem. But there are other unsolved codes out there that might not be solved because of similar reasons. There might be problems with them, or they might be homemade methods. And so we need a better way to identify those and apply the right techniques to unravel them. And probably one of the biggest things was it really did take a village. It was the 3 of us that cracked it, but that was building on years and years of work that people had put into it, exploring the cipher and digging up clues and exploring different ideas, going down the wrong path and showing us that it was the wrong path, and all that stuff. It kind of culminated in this success. So, even though we have the solution to the 340, the work's not over because, as I mentioned, there's a lot of unsolved codes still out there that we are eager to find the answers to. So if you want more information about the Zodiac ciphers, I've got a YouTube series called Let's Crack Zodiac. This is a thumbnail from the episode where we announced the solution. Check it out if you want to see the process in breaking it. And it's an ongoing series, so there's still new episodes coming out. And if you want to contact me, there's my email address, drranchek@gmail.com. And I'll open the floor to questions.